You don't have a money problem. You have a loyalty problem. In the next hour, you'll see exactly why every dollar you earn leaves faster than it arrived. And you'll walk out holding a 90-day protocol that stops the leak. Look at the wall in front of you. If you've ever taped a vision board there, magazine cutouts of cars, a mansion, stacks of bills, an apartment number written in marker across an A4 sheet, go put your hand on it now. Touch the paper. Notice the temperature. Notice the weight. Now ask yourself, honestly, when did anything on that wall ever move? It hasn't. The version of the law of attraction sold to you was a metaphor that someone forgot to label as a metaphor. You are not a magnet. The universe is not a vending machine. And the affirmations you whispered into your pillow at 31 and 45 and last Tuesday did not fail because you whispered them wrong. They failed because the system they belong to was never the system you live inside. What you live inside is older, heavier, built across 4,000 years by people who knew exactly what they were building and why. A Roman emperor in the year 325, a council in a city called Nicaea, a book about forbidden knowledge sealed for 2,000 years in a cave at Qumran, a Viennese physician in 1784 whose findings the Royal Commission decided to bury under the word imagination. 3 children of your own, the one you were at 6, the one you were at 12, the one you still are at the bottom of every transaction. You'll learn each of them by name. You'll understand the exact mechanism by which your bank balance is held below a number your nervous system has already chosen for you. And you'll have a protocol in your hands, 90 days, 3 phases, drawn from the biology of belief and from a hypnotic technique older than your great-grandmother. A protocol that breaks the mechanism. I'm not going to ask you to believe any of it. I'm going to ask you to put one hand on your sternum and notice what it feels like when the truth starts to land. Cold first, then warm, then heavier than you expected. Let's begin. Before we look at history, we look at hardware. You cannot run a 4K signal through a cable rated for 480p. That is the problem, mechanically described. Here is the first thing nobody told you. The Latin word individuum means undivided, not unique, not special, undivided. Thomas Aquinas, writing in the 13th century inside a Dominican cell with cracked stone walls and a desk so worn that the wood had started to remember the shape of his elbows, used the word with surgical care. A true individual is a being whose body, mind, and spirit operate as one unit, not in parallel, not in cooperation, as one. The word for what most of us actually are has been sitting in any English dictionary for 700 years. We just stopped reading it. Put your hand flat on your chest. Feel the rise. Feel the fall. Now notice beneath that the small chemical war you have been losing for decades. Your mind wants money. Your body holds the breath of someone bracing for impact. Your spirit, whatever you mean by that word, is somewhere else entirely. Walking down a hallway you stopped visiting in your 20s. 3 rooms, 3 signals, 3 frequencies that do not match. That is not a metaphor. That is the actual condition of the equipment you have been using to manifest. Now zoom in, closer, closer than feels comfortable. Take a microscope to the skin on the back of your hand, past the dead layer of cells, past the capillaries threading like dim cabling under the surface, past the cells themselves with their walls and their nuclei and their small machinery. What you find at the bottom is no longer solid matter. It is points of light in motion. Every atom in your body is, at this exact second, vibrating. The proton in the hydrogen atom of the water in your blood is not sitting still. Nothing is. This is not a poetic image. It is fact, measurable, repeatable, taught in every undergraduate physics course on the planet. And here is the part that should make your jaw tighten. Your thoughts are part of that field. Every time a thought crosses your mind, neurons in your brain fire small electrical currents, measurable in millivolts, traceable in any clinical EEG. A thought is a physical event. It has a voltage, and a string of consistent thoughts, repeated for years, becomes a frequency, yours, the one you broadcast every second whether you mean to or not. Now here is the law underneath the law. The law of attraction, as you were sold it, does not work because the law itself is wrong. Plainly wrong, not exaggerated. There is no magnet pulling abundance toward you. There is no celestial Amazon order with your name on the package. What exists is something quieter and much more demanding. Call it the law of access. Everything you want already exists in the field around you. The money, the position, the relationship, the work that would make sense of your decades. None of it is missing. None of it needs to be summoned. It is already there. The only question is whether your equipment is tuned to receive it. That is the difference between attracting and accessing. You do not pull a radio station toward you. You match the frequency it is already broadcasting on. And if your dial is set to scarcity, every station you hear will play the same song in different keys until you die. Notice your jaw right now. Notice your shoulders. Notice the small tightness behind your sternum that arrived somewhere around the word scarcity. That tightness is the diagnosis. Which brings us to the second law nobody bothered to teach you. Being precedes having, always, without exception. You do not become rich by acquiring money. You acquire money by first becoming someone whose nervous system can tolerate having it. This is why most lottery winners file for bankruptcy within a few years. This is why the inheritance disappears inside a decade. This is why the bonus, the windfall, the unexpected check all dissolve in ways that look like bad luck and never were. The bank account does not decide what you keep. Your identity does. And identity is not a thought. It is a voltage held steady, a frequency you broadcast from the inside, 24 hours a day, regardless of what your mouth says about it in the mirror at 7 a.m. The outside world does not respond to your desires. It responds to your filter. What you experience as reality is the exact return signal of the frequency you are sending out. The reflection is precise. There is no error in the mirror. So if you want to know what frequency you have been broadcasting, look at your bank balance. Look at your relationships. Look at the work you have been allowed to do over the last 10 years. That number, those people, that work, those are your readings, not your fate. Your readings. Now hold all of that in one hand. The undivided self, the body that vibrates, the thought that has a voltage, the field that already contains what you want, the filter that decides what comes through, the identity that locks the receiver in place. 6 pieces, 1 machine. A machine that, in your case, has been quietly running the wrong program for as long as you can remember. Which raises a question the next section of this video will answer with surgical violence. If everything you want is already in the field, already there, already yours by right of existence, then who taught you that you needed permission to receive it? The answer is a date, 3 numbers, 3, 2, 5. In the early summer of the year 325, in a city on the northwestern coast of what is now Turkey, Nicaea, modern Iznik, 60 miles southeast of Istanbul, on the eastern shore of a freshwater lake the color of cold steel, a Roman emperor named Constantine I walked into the great hall of the imperial palace, took the central seat in robes of imperial purple, and invited roughly 300 bishops to decide what Christianity was going to be from that morning forward. He was not a Christian. Not yet. He would not be baptized for another 12 years, on his deathbed, in the year 337, by a bishop named Eusebius of Nicomedia. He was the son of the soldier emperor Constantius Chlorus and a woman named Helena, born around the year 248 in the town of Drepanum, in Bithynia, the daughter of a stable hand, who would later be canonized as a saint after her famous pilgrimage to Jerusalem in her late 70s, where she allegedly identified the site of the crucifixion and the wood of the true cross, an event the Roman Church still observes on the 14th of September. Constantine inherited from his mother both a quiet Christian sympathy and an iron sense of political utility. He was first hailed emperor by his troops in York, in northern Britain, on the 25th of July in the year 306, at the age of about 33, after his father died there during a campaign against the Picts. From York, he fought his way down through Gaul, across the Alps and into Italy, until on the 28th of October, in the year 312, he met his rival Maxentius outside Rome, at a Tiber crossing called the Milvian Bridge. The night before that battle, according to his own account, given decades later to the Bishop Eusebius of Caesarea, he saw a cross of light above the afternoon sun, and 4 words written in Greek across the sky, En tuto nika, in this sign, conquer. He had his soldiers paint the Chi Rho monogram on the inside of their shields. Maxentius drowned in the Tiber wearing his armor. Constantine walked into Rome alive, with one half of the empire already in his hand, and a divine sponsor newly under contract. In the year 313, he and his eastern co-emperor Licinius issued the Edict of Milan, which made the previously persecuted Christian faith legal across the empire. By 324, after one final civil war, he was sole ruler of both halves. By the spring of 325, he had a problem. A priest in Alexandria named Arius was teaching that the Son had been created by the Father in time and was therefore not eternal. A bishop named Athanasius was insisting the Son was co-eternal, of one substance with the Father. The dispute was tearing apart the eastern provinces. Constantine did what emperors do when a faith starts costing them tax revenue. He summoned the bishops to Nicaea, gave them food and lodging at imperial expense, paid for their travel on the imperial post road, and asked them to settle it before they went home. They settled it. The result is a short text you have heard, perhaps without listening, in any Catholic, Orthodox, or Anglican service of the last 1600 years. The Nicene Creed. Behind the text, a quieter result. The architecture of intermediation. From the summer of 325 forward, access to the divine ran through a credentialed structure. The bishop, the priest, the sanctioned ritual, the approved book, the condemned heretic, the witch who would be burned eventually for knowing how to set a bone or read a chart by the moon, the peasant who could not read Latin, which by then was the language the sacred had been locked inside. The gate was installed. The gatekeeper was paid. The receipt is in your nervous system right now. You did not get to receive directly. You petitioned. And here is where the cable rated for 480p shows up under your fingers, 1700 years later. Every version of the law of attraction sold to you in the last 40 years is the same mechanism wearing a new shirt. You ask the universe. You pray to the universe. You make your request to the universe. You wait. You behave well. You hope your signal was received. You blame yourself when it was not. The vocabulary changed. The posture did not. You are still kneeling. That is the inheritance, not the cosmology. The posture. Notice what just happened to your shoulders. Because the truth that comes next is not metaphysical. It is structural. The law of access has nothing to ask for. There is no petition because there is no court. There is no waiting because there is no clerk. There is no permission because the field that contains what you want has no gate and never had one. The gate was installed in a room in Nicaea in the year 325 by men who needed it to be there for reasons that had to do with taxation, with armies, with the survival of an empire that had already started to collapse under its own weight. You inherited the gate. You did not inherit a debt to it. From this moment in the video forward, we are no longer talking about self-help. We are talking about the dismantling of a 1700-year-old piece of psychological infrastructure that has been living rent-free inside your nervous system since the day you were old enough to understand the word no. Before we open the actual file on Nicaea and on the 4,000 years that built that gate inside you, I want you to do one thing for the camera. Scroll down, find the comment box, and answer me with one sentence, in plain language. Not in spiritual language, not in self-help language, in the exact words your mother, or your father, or your first boss would have used. Tell me the moment you remember being taught, by someone, somewhere, in some specific room, that you needed permission to want more than you already had. I will read every one of them. While you write it, I am going to take you somewhere. To a cave. To one of 11 caves cut into the limestone cliffs above the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea, near a ruin called Khirbet Qumran. To a jar of clay so old it predates the New Testament. And to a book that was deliberately left out of the Bible you were raised on, because the bishops who sat in Nicaea in the year 325 and the reformers who came 1200 years after them both agreed it was too dangerous for you to read. That book is named after a man the Hebrew scriptures say did not die, but walked with God and was taken up alive. His name is Enoch. To find a book, you have to know it existed. The Book of Enoch existed for at least 600 years before anyone in the Latin West got embarrassed by it. It was composed in fragments, in Aramaic and Hebrew, between roughly the 3rd century before Christ and the 1st century after, which means it was already old, already canonical in some Jewish communities, when Jesus was a child in Nazareth. It was quoted by name in the New Testament itself. The Epistle of Jude, chapter 1, verses 14 and 15, cites Enoch directly. Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment upon all. That citation sits inside your Bible. You have probably never noticed it. The book is older than the Gospels. The book is older than Paul. The book is older than the cross. And then, somewhere between the 2nd and the 5th century after Christ, the book vanished from the West. It did not vanish from the East. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church, founded in the 4th century in the Kingdom of Aksum, kept Enoch inside its canon and has kept it there continuously for the last 1600 years. It was translated from a Greek intermediary into Ge'ez, the liturgical language of Ethiopian Christianity, sometime around the year 500. In monasteries in the Ethiopian highlands, in cold stone rooms heated by goat dung fires, monks copied Enoch by hand, generation after generation, while the European Church forgot the book had ever existed. In the year 1773, a Scottish traveller named James Bruce, 6'4", fluent in Arabic, half mad with curiosity, returned from his expedition to the source of the Blue Nile, carrying 3 manuscripts of Enoch in Ge'ez. He deposited one in the Bodleian Library at Oxford, one in the Bibliothèque du Roi in Paris, and kept one for himself. The English-speaking world would have to wait another 48 years for a translation. Richard Lawrence, an Oxford theologian who would soon become Archbishop of Cashel in Ireland, finally published one in 1821. The full critical edition by R.H. Charles came in 1912. That was the book they had buried. Then, in the late winter of 1947, a 15-year-old Bedouin shepherd of the Ta'amira tribe, a boy named Muhammad Ed-Dib, lost a goat in the cliffs above the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea, near a site called Khirbet Qumran. He threw a stone into a small dark opening in the rock to scare the goat out. He heard pottery break. He climbed in. Inside the cave he found tall jars of clay, sealed with linen, some of them already broken. Inside the jars were scrolls of parchment, wrapped, brittle, written in a script he could not read. That was Cave 1. Over the next decade, archaeologists located 10 more caves in the cliffs around Qumran. From Cave 4 alone, they would recover the fragments of roughly 600 separate manuscripts. Among those fragments, in Aramaic, in handwriting older than the New Testament, were 11 copies of the Book of Enoch. For the first time in modern history, scholars had physical proof that Enoch was not a medieval Ethiopian curiosity. It had been read, copied, and treasured by the Jewish community at Qumran 200 years before Jesus was born. It had been part of the spiritual world he walked through as a boy. Pick up the implication and turn it over in your hand for a moment. The book the Western Church removed from your inheritance was the same book the people who knew the historical Jesus were reading every day. Now we open it. The Book of Enoch begins in a place, a real, mapped, climbable place, Mount Hermon, the southern flank of the anti-Lebanon range, on the modern triple border between Lebanon, Syria, and Israel. 2,814 meters at the summit, snow on the upper slopes 8 months of the year, thin air, limestone shoulders. The headwaters of the Jordan rise on its lower flanks. From the summit, on a clear morning, you can see Damascus to the northeast and the Sea of Galilee to the south, both lying as small, dull mirrors in the haze. According to the first 36 chapters of the book, the section scholars call the Book of the Watchers, 200 angels stood on the summit of Mount Hermon in some unspecified era before the flood, looked down at the daughters of men in the valleys below, and made a pact. Their leader was a being whom the Aramaic fragments call Shemihaza, whom the Greek tradition calls Semyaza, whom the Ethiopic tradition calls Semjaza. He was hesitant. He told the others, "If we descend, and you do not follow through, I alone will bear the penalty for the sin." So the 200 bound themselves to one another by mutual curse on the summit, and from that mutual binding the mountain took its name. Hermon, in Hebrew, comes from the root Herem, the cursed thing, the thing devoted to destruction. They came down, they took wives, and they began to teach. This is the part that should make your jaw tighten, because the curriculum the fallen Watchers taught humanity is not magic in the cartoon sense. It is the foundation of every industry that has ever consumed your attention or your wages. Azazel, the second in command, taught humanity to extract metals from the earth and to forge them. He taught the making of swords, the making of knives, the making of shields, the making of breastplates. He also taught, and the text places these in the same breath, in the same sentence, the cutting of precious stones, the making of bracelets, the use of antimony to darken the eyelids, the recipes for tinctures and dyes, and the general art of cosmetic adornment. Read that list twice. The same teacher who armed the species also taught it how to decorate itself. The defense industry and the beauty industry, in one instructor, in one lesson, in 1 year before the flood. Semjaza taught enchantments and the cutting of roots, which is to say medicinal and esoteric botany. Armaros taught the resolution of those same enchantments, the antidote to his colleagues' craft. Then came the astronomers. Barakijal taught astrology, the reading of human fate in the sky. Kokabel taught the constellations themselves, the mapping. Ezekiel taught the knowledge of the clouds. Arakiel taught the signs of the earth, the geological omens. Shamsiel taught the signs of the sun. Sariel taught the course and the movement of the moon. Pause for a second on what that is. In one short passage, the Book of Enoch attributes to a group of rebel angels the origin of metallurgy, weapons technology, cosmetics, jewelry, pharmacology, dye chemistry, astronomy, astrology, meteorology, geology, and lunar calendar science. Every applied science a Bronze Age human being could have used to make themselves wealthier, more attractive, more powerful, or more predictively accurate about the world around them. And the verdict the book passes on this transfer of knowledge is not that the knowledge was wrong. The verdict is that humanity received it too early. From the unions of the Watchers with human women came the Nephilim, giants. The book describes them as 3,000 cubits tall, which is impossible in any literal sense, and the number is almost certainly a corruption of a much smaller original. What matters is what they did. They ate. They consumed all the agricultural produce of the regions where they lived. When the harvests could no longer feed them, they began eating the livestock. When the livestock ran out, they began eating the humans. When the humans were no longer enough, the text says, they began drinking the blood of one another. That is the picture. A teaching transferred to a species not ready for it. An offspring with an appetite the host could not sustain. A collapse downward, into cannibalism, into the consumption of one's own. We will come back to that picture in 20 minutes. When we sit down, with what happens to a bank account that grows in the hands of a nervous system that was not prepared to hold it. But first we have to deal with why this book was removed from your inheritance. The official reason given by the Council of Laodicea around the year 363, when Enoch was first formally excluded from the Western canon, was that the book was apocryphal, meaning hidden, meaning not authorized. The real reason was theological infrastructure. If you accept the cosmology of the Book of the Watchers, then the origin of evil on earth is not a moral failure located inside the human being. It is an interference from above. Knowledge was given to a species too young to hold it, and corruption followed. The human being in this cosmology is not the author of the fall. The human being is the inheritor of a contamination. That cosmology was incompatible with the doctrine the Church needed. The doctrine the Church needed was original sin. Augustine of Hippo, writing in North Africa between 397 and 430, formalized it. Every human is born already guilty, already in debt, already requiring an institutional intervention, namely baptism, namely confession, namely the sacrament, namely the priest, namely the bishop, namely eventually the indulgence, to be made eligible for grace. The original sin doctrine required a singular human author of the fall, namely Adam, and a singular human inheritance of the guilt, namely you. It required that the wound be located inside the species, not received from outside. Because if the wound was received from outside, then the species was not in debt to the institution that claimed to heal it. 1,200 years later, when the Protestant reformers broke from Rome, they kept the original sin doctrine, and they kept the rejection of Enoch, Martin Luther, John Calvin, the Anglican settlement. Every major Reformation tradition agreed. The book stayed out. So the gate that Constantine installed in 325 had a deeper foundation poured beneath it across the following 2 centuries. The framework was not just, you need permission to access the divine. The framework was, you are born wrong, you exist in debt, and the debt is collected by the same institution that named it. You inherited that. Inside your nervous system, in the silent voice that runs underneath every transaction, in the small contraction that arrives the second your account passes a number you were not expecting, that doctrine is still drawing interest. Notice your jaw again. The medieval church then took the doctrine one full step further. By the High Middle Ages, in the writings of theologians from Bernard of Clairvaux to Francis of Assisi to the popular sermons of the mendicant orders, voluntary poverty was reclassified as spiritual virtue. The peasant who could not eat was, in the official theology, closer to God. The merchant who prospered was suspect. Wealth itself became a moral hazard. This was not an accident of piety. It was also an instrument of feudal stability. A population that believes its hunger is sanctified does not rebel against the landlord who sanctified it. That theology, that exact theology, is still running inside you when you make money and feel guilty about making it, when you raise a price and feel ashamed, when you sit at a table in a hotel restaurant and feel the small pull behind your sternum that says, "This is not where I belong." That pull is not yours. That pull was installed by a 13th century French abbot you have never heard of, who needed a tired serf to stay tired. The Book of Enoch was buried because the doctrine of original sin could not survive its survival. And the doctrine of original sin, inside your case, has been buried inside the same body that wants to make money and cannot quite figure out why every dollar leaves the way it does. Open the door. The Book of Enoch finishes its description of the Nephilim with one of the strangest sentences in religious literature. After the giants had consumed every crop, every herd, every village, and finally each other, the text says, their spirits did not die with their bodies. The spirits of the Nephilim, the text says, became the spirits of the earth, restless, hungry, unable to be filled, roaming the populated places, looking for hosts. Whether you take that as cosmology or as metaphor is your business. What is not negotiable is what the picture describes, with terrifying accuracy when you place it next to a bank statement. You make money, quickly, with unusual ease, a project, a contract, a freelance window, a sale, a quarterly bonus, a check that lands in the inbox like good weather, $8,000, $11,000, $22,000. The number sits inside the account for less than 3 weeks, sometimes less than 3 days, and then the unscheduled expense arrives. The car needs the transmission, the crown on the molar finally cracks, the roof, the vet, the plane ticket your sister needs you to buy, the decision you make at 2 in the morning, with the phone in your hand and a glass of wine on the nightstand, to invest in something you would never have invested in at noon. The number drains. The account returns to a baseline you have unconsciously been protecting your entire adult life. That is the first clinical sign of the block. Call it what the diagnostic literature calls it. In the dry language of behavioral finance, immediate financial dispersion, generation followed by liquidation inside a predictable cycle. The cycle does not respond to income. A person with this pattern earning $50,000 a year will dispose of it inside the same window in which a person earning $300,000 a year disposes of theirs. The ceiling moves. The mechanism does not. Notice your hands right now. Notice whether you are holding them tighter than you were 3 minutes ago. The second clinical sign is the fear that follows the gain. Your account starts to swell. Not catastrophically, just past the line your nervous system has tagged as safe. And the body responds with something you would not normally associate with prosperity. Cortisol release. Mild tachycardia. The breath shortens at the top of the inhale. You catch yourself running at 3 in the morning, the mental ledger of what could collapse, what could be taken, what could be lost. The wealthier you become, in numerical terms, the more vigilant you feel obligated to be. The peace you thought money would buy you arrives only in the first 48 hours after the deposit and is replaced by a low-grade siege. Security, when sourced externally, is a hostage situation in which you are both the kidnapper and the kidnapped. The third clinical sign is the one nobody likes to say out loud. The loyalty problem we named in the first sentence of this video. If your father worked in a body shop for 40 years and your mother taught second grade for 35, and you grew up watching them split a tax refund 3 ways between groceries, the electric, and a folder marked emergency, then somewhere inside you, around the age of 6 or 7, a deal was struck. The deal was, I will stay here. I will not go too far past what they have, because to go past it is to leave them behind. And to leave them behind is to stop being theirs. The child who made that deal does not know that the parents would in fact be proud. The child cannot read the future. The child only knows that going past the family is, in the only emotional language available to a 6-year-old, a betrayal. So every time you approach the ceiling of what your father earned in his best year, an old vow tightens around your sternum. You self-sabotage. You hesitate at the close. You quote yourself low. You take the call that ends the deal. You return to the elevation at which you are still recognizable to the people who made you. That is loyalty, doing the work it was built to do. Loyalty does not know about income brackets. The fourth clinical sign is anxiety. Not the mental state you have been taught to manage with a meditation app and a magnesium supplement. The transmission, the thing that arrives unannounced, that wakes you at 4 in the morning with no triggering thought, that lives behind your collarbone and refuses to dissolve no matter how many breathing exercises you complete. That is not a malfunction. That is a child's voice, a 6-year-old voice, still inside the body of a 48-year-old man or woman, still trying to alert someone that something is not safe. Your adult mind has rationalized that voice into the language of risk assessment. The voice itself is much older than your reasoning. It is pre-verbal. It is the same voice you used at 3 when the lights were turned off in a room you did not understand. Until that voice is met directly, which we will do in Act 5 of this video, no amount of investment strategy will quiet it. The fifth clinical sign is the imposter. You produce a result. You hit a number. You publish the book, win the contract, close the round, deliver the project. And the satisfaction lasts on average between 4 and 11 days. After that, the internal monologue arrives. The same one, every time. They are going to find out. They are going to see that I do not actually know what I am doing. The next one will be the one that exposes me. So you raise the volume of production. You take on more. You announce louder. You curate harder. And the gap between what you broadcast and what you privately believe widens until you start to feel, in any room where people respect you, a low metallic taste of fraud at the back of your tongue. Those 5 signs, taken together, are what the Book of Enoch was describing 7,000 miles and 22 centuries away, when it said the spirits of the Nephilim became the spirits of the earth, restless, hungry, unable to be filled. The book gave them a name. Behavioral finance gives them a name. Inherited family trauma gives them a name. Cognitive behavioral therapy gives them a name. They are all the same 5 appetites, walking through your bank account looking for hosts. So the question that has been sitting at the center of this video for an hour now finally has to be asked in operational language. Can the appetite be killed? The answer is yes. The answer has been yes since the year 1779, and the man who first proved it died forgotten in a small town on the German shore of Lake Constance in March of 1815, after a 40-year career that the official medical establishment of 2 countries had unanimously labeled a fraud. His name was Franz Anton Mesmer. He was born on the 23rd of May, in the year 1734, in the village of Isnang, on the same Lake Constance to which he would return to die. His father was a master forester in the employ of the local archbishop. His mother was the daughter of a locksmith. He was raised in a household of 9 children in cold pine rooms that smelled of resin and bread and his father's tobacco. He was, by all accounts, a quiet, mathematical, unremarkable child. He studied first at the Jesuit institutions of Dillingen and then Ingolstadt in Bavaria, with the intention of becoming a priest. In his early 20s, he moved to Vienna. He shifted from theology to law, and from law, in his late 20s, to medicine. In 1766, at the age of 32, he submitted his doctoral thesis at the University of Vienna. The title, in Latin, was Dissertatio Physico-Medica de Planetarum Influxu in Corpus Humanum, physical and medical dissertation on the influence of the planets on the human body. The thesis argued, drawing on Newton's recently formalized theory of gravitation, that the same gravitational tides that move the oceans must also act, in smaller measure, on the fluids of the human body. The thesis was accepted. Mesmer became a physician. For 10 years he ran a respectable practice in Vienna. He married a wealthy widow, Maria Anna von Posch, in 1768. She was 10 years older than him, and brought him a townhouse on the Landstrasse, with a music room and a garden that backed onto the city wall. He hosted the 12-year-old Mozart in that garden in the summer of 1768. The opera Mozart wrote that summer, Bastien und Bastienne, may have had its first performance in Mesmer's house, and then, somewhere around the year 1773, in the course of treating a young woman named Franzl Österlin, who suffered from convulsions, vomiting, hallucinations, and partial paralysis, Mesmer noticed something that would consume the rest of his life. When he applied magnets to certain points on her body, in a certain sequence, with a certain quality of focused attention, her symptoms remitted. He concluded initially that a fluid analogous to magnetism was passing from the magnets into the patient. He named the fluid magnetism animal magnetism, to distinguish it from the magnetism of iron. Within a few years, he discarded the magnets. He realized the magnets were a delivery system for something the operator himself was producing. The fluid, whatever it was, ran through his own hands. The patients responded to the focused intention of the operator, transmitted by touch, by gesture, by sustained gaze, without a single spoken word. The non-verbal channel, ignored by the entire medical establishment of his century, was the channel. In February of the year 1778, after a public dispute in Vienna over a blind young pianist named Maria Theresia Paradis, whose sight he had partially restored and then lost when she was removed from his care, Mesmer left Austria for Paris. He took an apartment off the Place Vendôme. He rented a treatment hall, and he began, within months, to become a phenomenon. The centerpiece of his Paris practice was a piece of equipment of his own design called the baquet. It was a circular wooden tub, roughly 5 feet in diameter, 2 feet deep. Inside the tub, he placed bottles of magnetized water arranged in a precise pattern around iron filings, with iron rods protruding through the sealed lid. Patients sat in concentric circles around the baquet, holding the rods to their afflicted parts, or touching a rope that connected one patient's wrist to another's, so that the room itself became a single closed circuit of bodies. The room was lit only by candles. The walls were hung with heavy velvet curtains. A glass harmonica played slow, sustained notes in an adjoining chamber. Mesmer moved through the room in a long lilac silk robe, passing his hands over each patient at a distance of perhaps 4 inches from the skin, never touching. Within 20 minutes, the room would enter what the witnesses called the crisis. Patients wept. Patients convulsed. Patients fainted, were carried into a side chamber called the salle de crise, and woke an hour later, reporting that symptoms they had carried for years were gone. The Parisian aristocracy descended on him. Marie Antoinette became a patron and offered him, on the king's behalf, a lifetime stipend of 20,000 livres to remain in France and train French physicians in his method. The Marquis de Lafayette, returning from the American War, took private lessons. The waiting list at Mesmer's hall grew to a full year. He accumulated, in 5 years of Paris practice, the equivalent of several million modern dollars. The medical establishment of France could not tolerate it. In March of 1784, King Louis XVI appointed a royal commission to investigate the claims of animal magnetism. The roster of that commission is the cleanest concentration of scientific authority that century could assemble. Benjamin Franklin, then the American minister to France, the inventor of the lightning rod and the bifocals, was named chairman. Antoine Lavoisier, the founder of modern chemistry, the man who would name oxygen, was a member. Joseph Ignace Guillotin, a physician who would later lobby for the humane execution device that bears his name, was a member. Jean-Sylvain Bailly, the astronomer who would later be the first mayor of revolutionary Paris, was a member. They worked for 5 months. They blindfolded patients and informed them, falsely, that they were being magnetized when nothing was being done. The patients went into crisis anyway. They led patients into the garden at Passy and instructed them that one of the apricot trees had been magnetized in advance. The patients selected the wrong tree and went into crisis embracing it. They concluded in their final report that no magnetic fluid existed. The effects, the commission wrote in August of 1784, were caused by imagination. Read the verdict again, slowly. The commission did not conclude that nothing happened. The commission concluded that something happened, that the something was reliable, that the something produced documented physiological effects in patient after patient, that the something cured patients of conditions ranging from blindness to paralysis to chronic pain, and that the cause of the something was not a magnetic fluid, but the patient's own mind, focused by suggestion, focused by ritual, focused by the operator's directed attention, which is, in any language a working clinician would use today, a complete description of clinical hypnosis, of placebo, of the autonomic response, of every documented mechanism by which directed intention modifies physiology. The commission was correct in its description and catastrophically wrong in its dismissal. They had found the door. They closed it because it was not the door they had been sent to find. The careers of the four commissioners ended in four different ways. Franklin returned to America and died at home in Philadelphia in 1790. Bailey was guillotined on the 12th of November, 1793, on the Champ de Mars during the Terror. Lavoisier, the great chemist, was guillotined on the 8th of May, 1794, in the Place de la Révolution. The blade that decapitated him had been lobbied for, on humanitarian grounds, by the same man who had sat beside him on the Mesmer Commission. Guillotin himself nearly went to the same blade. He survived imprisonment, lived until 1814, and spent his remaining years trying to dissociate his name from the device. The man whose method they had dismissed died, quietly, in his hometown of Meersburg, on the German shore of Lake Constance, on the 5th of March, 1815, at the age of 80. His passing was noted by no major newspaper. The technique he had identified did not die. It went underground, into the lineages of the Marquis de Puységur, who discovered somnambulistic trance in 1784, into the Abbé José Custodio de Faria, who introduced the verbal induction in Paris in the 1810s, into James Braid, the Scottish surgeon who coined the word hypnosis in 1841 and rebuilt the entire system on a physiological basis, into Jean-Martin Charcot's clinic at the Salpêtrière in the 1880s, where Freud studied, into Freud's early work, into the development of medical hypnosis by Milton Erickson in the 20th century. Allan Kardec, working in Paris in the 1850s, took the same non-verbal channel and interpreted it through the lens of communication with discarnate spirits, founding the doctrine known as Spiritism. The distinction matters. Mesmer studied the operator's transmission of focused intention into the patient's nervous system. Kardec studied what he believed to be transmission from elsewhere. Different territories, the same channel. What sits inside your body right now is the receiving equipment for that channel. When you join your two hands together, palm to palm, in prayer or in concentration, or simply in a quiet moment by a window, the fingerprints on the pads of your fingers, each one a unique whirl of low-voltage electrical polarity, close a circuit that runs up through your forearms, across the front of your chest, around the perimeter of your heart, and back. Ancient priestly orders knew this without knowing the electromagnetism. The Buddhist mudra knew. The Catholic gesture of joined palms knew. The Brazilian benzadeira closing her hands over the head of a feverish child knew. They were not performing piety. They were closing a circuit that produces a measurable change in vagal tone in under 90 seconds. Slower heart, slower breath, lower cortisol. A nervous system stepping out of vigilance and into the only state in which it is capable of receiving anything new. You will do that, deliberately, in the protocol at the end of this video, because the architecture we have been mapping for the last 40 minutes, the gate at Nicaea, the doctrine of original sin, the buried Book of Enoch, the giants and their appetites, the 5 clinical signs, the dismissal of Mesmer, was constructed across 1700 years for the purpose of preventing one specific recognition, that you alone, without an intermediary, are equipped to operate the channel. That recognition is the climax of the video, and it arrives, dressed in the language of the last book we have not yet opened, in the final pages of the Book of Enoch itself, where a man who walked with God is taken up into the heavens and shown the throne of glory and told by an angel standing beside him the name of the figure who is about to sit on it. That scene is the next thing we look at. The Book of Enoch is divided into 5 sections. We have been working inside the first one, the Book of the Watchers. The second section, the Parables of Enoch, was added later, probably in the 1st century before Christ, and it is, by some distance, the most extraordinary text in the entire corpus. The parables describe 3 visions. In them, an angel takes Enoch on a tour of the heavens. He is shown the storehouses of the winds. He is shown the chambers where the sun and the moon are kept between their crossings. He is shown the place where the souls of the dead are sorted, the righteous on one side, the wicked on the other, awaiting judgment. And at the center of every vision, on a throne of glory, sits a figure the text calls, again and again, by a single title, the Son of Man. This is the title English-speaking Christians know from the Gospels. where Jesus uses it of himself more than 80 times. What almost no English-speaking Christian knows is that the title is older than the Gospels. It was already a developed cosmological figure in Jewish apocalyptic literature when Jesus picked it up. The figure in the parables of Enoch has properties most modern readers associate exclusively with the Christ. He is pre-existent, hidden by God before the foundation of the world. He sits beside the Lord of Spirits on the throne. He judges the living and the dead. And one short, devastating sentence describes his function in terms that have everything to do with the subject of this video. The Son of Man, the text says, will reveal all the hidden treasures. Hold on to that phrase. Not the treasures of metaphor. The treasures, plural, concrete, hidden. The same word the ancient world used for what kings kept in vaults and what merchants carried in lined boxes. The Son of Man is described as the authority who unseals them. He is the one before whom every locked door opens. Every sealed scroll is read. Every withheld inheritance is finally distributed to the rightful heir. You have been reading that figure for 2,000 years of inherited Christianity as a being outside you, in the sky, in the future, returning eventually to judge you for whatever debts you still owe. The parables of Enoch tell a different story. In the last vision of the section, in chapters 70 and 71 of the book, Enoch himself is taken up into the heavens for the third and final time. He approaches the throne. He sees the figure he has been describing for 35 chapters, and then the angel walking beside him, an angel the text names Michael, turns and addresses Enoch directly. The words are some of the strangest in the entire Western religious archive. "You are the Son of Man," the angel says, "who was born for righteousness. Righteousness dwells over you. The righteousness of the head of days will not forsake you." Enoch, the human being, the son of Jared, the man who, the book of Genesis says, walked with God for 365 years and was not, because God took him. The husband of a woman whose name we are not told. The father of Methuselah, a man, by every account in the surviving record, of complete biographical specificity. That man, in the climax of the parables, is shown that he himself, in his full embodied humanity, is the figure he has been watching on the throne for the entire vision. The Son of Man and the human being are the same, are. Pause for a moment with what just happened. The text the Western Church removed from your inheritance contains, at its climax, the exact theological move that the official cosmology of the last 1700 years was constructed to prevent. The intermediary collapses. The figure with absolute cosmic authority to unseal every hidden treasure turns out to be the very human being who was standing in the throne room, looking at the throne. The throne has no separate occupant. He had been carrying the office inside him the whole time and had not understood it until it was named, out loud, by another voice. That is the recognition the gate at Nicaea was built to delay, because if Enoch, an ordinary man with a wife and a son and a mortal lifespan, can be told that he is the Son of Man, then so can you. And if you are the figure with authority to unseal the hidden treasures, then there is nobody to ask. There is no celestial clerk who is going to stamp your application. There is no waiting room. There is no list of beings ahead of you in line. The gate that you spent 48 years standing in front of, hat in hand, has on the other side a chair with your name on it, and the chair has been empty the entire time. Notice the temperature of your hands. Notice the position of your shoulders. Notice the small thing happening at the base of your throat that you do not yet have words for. That is the old self-image dying. The one that needed permission, the one that asked, the one that petitioned, the one that fasted and affirmed and visualized and waited and felt, every time the response did not arrive, that the failure was somehow inside its own technique. That self-image does not survive the recognition. It cannot survive the recognition. It was built around a fiction that has just been demonstrated, by a text 2,500 years old, to be exactly what it always was, a fiction. What is left on the other side of that death is something the spiritual marketplace of your country has no vocabulary for, because the spiritual marketplace of your country still profits from selling you techniques to ask. What is left is the inheritor, standing in the room, holding the keys. Before we walk into the last room of this video, where you will see what a single people built with this exact recognition across 2,000 years of recorded economic history, I am going to ask you for one thing. If you have come with me this far, if any part of what you just heard has landed inside your chest in a place that does not have words yet, take 3 seconds, scroll to the channel button, and subscribe. Not for the algorithm, for the next file. There are more sealed rooms to be opened. There are more books that were buried. There are more figures whose names you have not yet heard, and the work of bringing them up into the daylight one by one is the work we are doing here, together, every week. Then come back. We are about to walk into the only civilization in recorded history that built itself around the recognition you just had, and outlived every empire that tried to bury it. On the 9th day of the month of Av, in the year 70 of the Common Era, the legions of Titus, son of the Roman Emperor Vespasian, broke through the third wall of Jerusalem after a siege that had lasted 5 months. They burned the second temple to its foundations. The fire was so hot that the gold that lined the inner sanctuary melted, ran down between the stones of the platform, and cooled inside the cracks. Roman soldiers, the historian Josephus reports, returned weeks later to pry the stones apart with their swords, looking for it. By the time they were finished, the entire temple platform had been disassembled, stone by stone, and the building that had stood at the center of Jewish religious life for nearly 6 centuries no longer existed. The Jewish people, in that moment, lost the only institution through which the law had been administered. The sacrifice had been offered, and the divine had been formally accessed. What they did next is the practical answer to every question this video has been asking. A small council of rabbis, led by a man named Yochanan ben Zakkai, had already left the city before the final assault. The legend recorded in the Talmud says that Yochanan, recognizing the siege would end the way it ended, had himself carried out through the Roman lines inside a wooden coffin, his followers explaining to the soldiers at the gate that the master had died and required burial outside the walls. Once clear of the lines, he requested an audience with the Roman general Vespasian and asked for one specific concession. He did not ask to save the temple. He did not ask to save the priesthood. He asked for a small coastal town named Yavne and permission to teach there. Vespasian granted it. Inside 3 generations, the school at Yavne and its successors had restructured an entire civilization. The temple was gone. The animal sacrifices were gone. The priestly hierarchy was functionally gone. What replaced all of it was a book and the universal capacity to read it. The Mishnah, the first formal codification of the oral law, was compiled by Rabbi Judah Hanasi in the Galilee around the year 200. The Gemara, the rabbinic commentary on the Mishnah, was completed in the Babylonian academies of Sura and Pumbedita around the year 500. Together, the Mishnah and the Gemara form the Talmud. There are 2 Talmuds. The shorter Jerusalem Talmud, compiled around the year 400 in the Galilee, and the longer, more authoritative Babylonian Talmud. Together, they run to roughly 2.5 million words, of which roughly half are direct commentary on civil and commercial law. This is where the recognition that took Enoch by surprise on the throne becomes practical infrastructure. Inside the Talmud, in a passage from the small tractate called Pirkei Avot, chapter 5, paragraph 21, the rabbis specify the age at which a Jewish boy must begin to read scripture. 5 years old. They specify the age at which he must begin the Mishnah. 10. They specify the age at which he must take responsibility for the commandments. 13. They specify the age at which he must begin the Gemara, which is the deep work, the legal argumentation, the dialectical interpretation. 15. By the year 64 of the Common Era, 6 years before the temple fell, the high priest Joshua ben Gamla had already issued a ruling that every Jewish boy in every town in Judea, regardless of his family's wealth, must be sent to school at the age of 6 or 7. The community was required to fund it. Communities that could not produce a literate generation were considered, in the rabbinic literature, to have failed in their basic obligation. This is, as far as the historical record shows, the first system of universal compulsory male literacy enacted anywhere on earth. It was enacted in the 1st century. It was enacted by a people who had just lost their political sovereignty, their capital, their temple, and most of their priesthood. They had nothing left to defend except the capacity to read. That capacity, compounded across the next 19 centuries, became an economic engine that the medieval European world could not understand and consistently misread as conspiracy. The halakha, The body of Jewish religious law contained extensive provisions for commercial transactions, contracts, loans, partnerships, trusts, inheritance. The mechanism known as the heter iska, developed by medieval rabbis to permit interest-bearing investment between Jews within the prohibitions of biblical usury, was effectively a venture capital partnership structure 400 years before the Italian banking houses discovered the same idea. Jewish merchants in the medieval Mediterranean carried letters of credit, drawn on rabbinic courts, that allowed a trader in Cairo to deposit goods in Alexandria and collect their value in Barcelona without moving the goods themselves. The networks ran on trust. The trust ran on shared literacy and shared law. The shared law ran on the Talmud. In the 11th century, in the town of Troyes in northern France, a vintner and Talmudic scholar named Solomon ben Isaac, known to history simply as Rashi, wrote line-by-line commentaries on the Hebrew Bible and the Babylonian Talmud that are still printed alongside the source text in every yeshiva on earth 1,000 years later. He supported himself selling wine. He never held an academic position. The commentaries are read every Saturday by tens of thousands of people who learned to read them as boys. In the 12th century, in Cordoba and then in Cairo, a physician to the Egyptian sultan named Moses ben Maimon, known as Maimonides, or, in the rabbinic literature, as the Rambam, compiled the Mishneh Torah, the first systematic codification of all Jewish law from the Talmud into 14 books arranged by subject. He wrote it in Hebrew so that it could be read by the Jew of Yemen as easily as by the Jew of France. He treated the law as accessible, the property of every literate adult. In the closing days of the 19th century, in 1896, a Cambridge professor named Solomon Schechter was shown 2 damaged folios of Hebrew text by 2 Scottish twin sisters, Agnes Lewis and Margaret Gibson, who had bought them in a market in Cairo. Schechter recognized the text as a fragment of the lost Hebrew original of the Book of Ecclesiasticus. He traveled to Cairo. In the attic of the Ben Ezra synagogue in Old Fustat, he found a sealed room, a genizah, where the community had stored every piece of Hebrew writing. It could not bring itself to throw away for 800 years. 200,000 documents, bills of lading, marriage contracts, letters between merchants in India and merchants in Spain, school exercises, children's first attempts at the alphabet, written in shaky ink on the back of a tax receipt, the economic and intellectual life of an ordinary literate community, preserved in its routine, in its handwriting, in the dust. Read what was in that attic and you stop thinking about Jewish economic success as the product of any single famous family or any single financial innovation. You start seeing it for what it actually was. A 1900-year accumulation of ordinary literate people doing ordinary literate things, contractually, lawfully, in writing, with reciprocal obligation, across an unbroken commercial nervous system that the temple had been replaced with, on the day Yochanan ben Zakkai asked Vespasian for a coastal town. And underneath all of it, theologically, was an idea that no European Christian theology of the same period held. The idea is called, in modern Hebrew, tikkun olam. The phrase translates, loosely, as the repair of the world. It originates in the Mishnah in the 2nd century and acquires its full mystical weight in the 16th century Kabbalah of Isaac Luria in Safed, in the Upper Galilee. The doctrine teaches that the human being is a co-creator with God, charged with collecting the scattered sparks of divine light from the broken vessels of creation and restoring them, one act at a time, to wholeness. In this cosmology, wealth is not a moral hazard. Wealth is a tool. The ethical and lawful accumulation of resources is one of the instruments by which the repair is performed. Compare that for 1 second with the medieval Catholic teaching we examined in Act 3. The peasant who could not eat was, in the official theology of his church, closer to God. The merchant who prospered was suspect. Wealth itself was a moral hazard. 2 cosmologies, 2 outcomes. 800 years of comparative data. By the time the European Enlightenment opened the doors that had been closed for those 800 years, by the time emancipation reached Jewish communities in France in 1791 and in the German states across the following decades, the population that emerged was disproportionately prepared to participate in the new economy. Not because of any biological advantage, because of 19 centuries of compounded literacy, compounded legal infrastructure, compounded commercial trust, and compounded theological permission to prosper. The same population had been expelled from England in 1290 by Edward I, from France in 1394 by Charles VI, from Spain in 1492 by the Reyes Católicos. On the same August day, Columbus left for what would turn out to be the Americas, from Portugal in 1497, from Vienna in 1670. Every expulsion confiscated their property. Every expulsion forced them to leave with what could be carried. And every time, the population that arrived in the next country rebuilt, often within a single generation, the economic position that had been confiscated from the last. This is not a magical fact about a people. It is a structural fact about what happens when you remove from a culture's theology the gate that the Council of Nicaea installed in your inheritance. When wealth is not framed as moral hazard, when literacy is not gated by class, when ethical commerce is treated as one of the instruments by which a human being repairs the world rather than soils his soul, the appetite that Enoch called the spirit of the Nephilim has no host. It cannot drain what is no longer being secretly disposed of out of guilt. It cannot consume what is no longer being unconsciously surrendered out of loyalty to a poverty that was sanctified by men who profited from its sanctification. You are not Jewish. That is irrelevant. The recognition is portable. The recognition is what Enoch was told by Michael in the 70th chapter of his book. The recognition is what the rabbis at Yavne built into a working civilization across 19 centuries of practical demonstration. The recognition is what Mesmer's hands carried, without language, into the nervous systems of Parisian aristocrats in 1779. The recognition is what your own nervous system is being asked to hold right now, for perhaps the first time in your adult life. You are the inheritor. The treasures were never withheld. They were waiting for somebody who knew in the architecture of his own body that he had the right to open them. That somebody is you. And the question that remains, the last question in this video, the question that the next section is going to answer in operational language, in step-by-step physical instruction, in the timing and posture and breath that turns recognition into nervous system reality, is the only question worth asking. How? The answer to how is a protocol. It will take you, the first time you do it, between 15 and 25 minutes. It will take you, after the first week, between 8 and 12. It is not a spiritual practice in the marketed sense. It is a deliberate, repeatable, biological procedure for closing the gap between the recognition you just had on this video and the nervous system you are going to live inside tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. when the alarm goes off and the receipts have not yet been paid. You will run the protocol once a day, every day, for 90 days. There is a biological reason for that number. We will come to it. For the next several minutes, I am going to walk you through the procedure, step by step. Bookmark this video. Come back tonight. Run it before sleep, when your nervous system is already approaching the threshold between waking and the first stage of unconsciousness, where the brain naturally produces the slower electrical rhythm clinicians call theta. Theta is the state the late afternoon light induces, the state you enter when you have been driving on a familiar highway for 90 minutes and arrive home unable to remember the last 20 exits. It is also the state in which the analytical mind suspends its objections, and a new instruction, delivered cleanly, will write into long-term memory without interference. That suspension is the door. The protocol walks through it. Step 1. The body. Lie down on your back, on a flat surface, in a room where you will not be interrupted for half an hour. Phone in another room, lights low, or off. A blanket if the room is cool. Close your eyes, not as a polite gesture, as an instruction to the muscles around the orbital socket. Send the order down into the small muscle that holds the upper lid. Let the lid become heavy, then heavier, then so heavy that if I asked you to open it, the muscle would receive the request and decline to execute. That refusal is the first physical confirmation that the nervous system has begun to step out of vigilance. Let the heaviness spread, down through the jaw. The tongue softens against the roof of the mouth. The shoulders drop 1 full inch lower than they normally sit. The lower back releases its small permanent grip on the mattress. The hips widen, the thighs roll outward, the calves go warm, the soles of the feet open. Your body is now in the configuration of someone who is not bracing for anything. Step 2. The breath. You will use a breathing pattern that the clinical literature on autonomic regulation has been validating in increments since the 1990s. The pattern is called 5-7-8 Inhale through the nose for a slow count of 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold the breath at the top, soft, no force, for a count of 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale through the mouth, lips slightly parted, with a low audible sound, for a count of 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Repeat. 4 cycles. On the first attempt, 8 cycles within a week. The exhale must always be longer than the inhale. The body reads a long exhale as the all-clear signal. The vagus nerve, which runs from the base of your skull down through your chest and into your abdomen, listens to that signal and instructs the heart to slow. Within 90 seconds, your heart rate will drop measurable beats per minute. Within 3 minutes, the analytical chatter of the day will lose its grip on the foreground. Within 5, you are in theta. You are now in the room, with the door. Step 3. The child. Bring up in the dark behind your closed eyes one specific memory from your childhood in which you registered the absence of money. Not the worst memory, the first one that arrives. A Christmas where the gift was wrapped in newspaper. A school trip you did not go on. A grocery aisle where your mother put the cereal box back on the shelf without looking at you. A father coming home late, smelling of metal and oil, sitting at the kitchen table with a folded envelope in his hands that he did not open until you had gone to bed. Hold the memory. Do not flinch from it. Do not narrate it. Let it stand in the room. Now find the child in the memory. The 6-year-old, the 8-year-old, the 11-year-old, whatever age you were. See where the child is standing. See what the child is wearing. See the angle of the light on the child's face. See the position of the small hands. You walk into the memory. You are the adult you are right now. In the body you are in right now, at the age you are right now. You kneel down in front of the child. You take the child's hands in yours. The child's hands are smaller than you remember. You speak, not in a script, in your own voice, in the words a 40-something adult uses with a child he loves. The substance is this: I am here now. You are not alone anymore. You do not have to carry the worry about money for this family. That was never your job. I am the adult now. I have done the work. I have built the body and the mind and the resources to handle this. For both of us, you are released from the contract. You can be 6. The child looks up at you. The child believes you, because you are speaking with the unmistakable voice of someone who has, in fact, done the work. You take the child in your arms. The child is the size of a child. You stand up, holding the child. You carry the child out of the memory and into the present, which is the room you are lying in right now, with the door closed, with the breath slow, with the heaviness in your lids. The child is safe. Step 4. The stack. Now, with the child safe in the present, you reach into your own memory and select 3 to 5 moments of demonstrated competence. Not moments of luck. Moments in which you, by your own effort, produced a result you were proud of. The first contract you signed at a number that scared you. The morning you finished the marathon. The day your daughter said the word that proved she had been listening. The afternoon you stood up to a boss who had been wrong for a year. The night you closed the deal that paid for the house. The week you held it together for someone who needed you to. You bring up the first one. You re-enter the body that produced it. You feel, in your chest, the specific quality of pressure that arrived in the moment of completion. Pride is a felt sensation. It has a location. Find it. You stack the second memory on top of the first. The 2 felt sensations occupy the same physical space inside your chest. They reinforce each other. The pressure thickens. You stack the third, the fourth, the fifth. By the 5th memory, the felt sensation in your chest has the weight and density of a small, warm stone resting against the inside of your sternum. That stone is the felt evidence of who you actually are, accumulated across your real life, in the language your nervous system uses to keep score. You now go back, in the dark behind your eyelids, to the original memory of scarcity, the one the child was standing in. You bring the stone with you. You set it down, on top of the old image. The old image cannot be located underneath it. Try to find it. Try to feel the old absence. The neural signal is no longer available. You have not erased the memory. You have buried its emotional charge under a layer of competing physical evidence so dense that the original signal can no longer rise to the surface. That is the technique. It is called, in the clinical literature on neuro-linguistic programming, an anchor collapse, or a memory overlay. It works because the nervous system can only foreground one dominant signal at a time, and you have just decided which one. Step 5. The declaration. In the same low voice you used to speak to the child, you now speak to yourself. 3 sentences, not affirmations in the cheerful sense, statements of the new operating fact, delivered with the certainty of a man reading the closing line of a contract he has already signed. First, I am an undivided being. My body, my mind, and my attention are in the same room. Second, the treasures are not withheld. They are accessible at the frequency I now broadcast. Third, I am the inheritor. I do not ask, I receive. You repeat each sentence twice. You feel the sentence land in the body. You do not perform. You state. Then you let it go. You do not chase the result. The work is done. The nervous system is now holding the new instruction, the way a hand holds a coin after the fingers close around it. In the same low voice you used to speak to the child, you now speak to yourself. 3 sentences, not affirmations in the cheerful sense, statements of the new operating fact, delivered with the certainty of a man reading the closing line of a contract he has already signed. First, I am an undivided being. My body, my mind, and my attention are in the same room. Second, the treasures are not withheld. They are accessible at the frequency I now broadcast. Third, I am the inheritor. I do not ask, I receive. You repeat each sentence twice. You feel the sentence land in the body. You do not perform. You state, then you let it go. You do not chase the result. The work is done. The nervous system is now holding the new instruction, the way a hand holds a coin after the fingers close around it. Step 6. The 90 days. You will do this protocol once a day. The cell biologist Bruce Lipton, in his work on the epigenetic regulation of gene expression, has argued for a window of approximately 90 days as the period required to consolidate a new behavioral pattern at the cellular and neurological level. The figure is approximate. The underlying mechanism, the repeated daily input gradually reshaping the synaptic pathways the nervous system defaults to, is well documented in the broader literature on habit formation and neuroplasticity. The first 30 days install the new circuit. Your nervous system, which has been firing the scarcity pattern continuously for between 30 and 70 years, encounters a different pattern, daily, in a state of low resistance, and begins to lay the first new synaptic connections. The second 30 days root the pattern. The new circuit moves from conscious effort to background operation. You begin to notice in your day that you no longer flinch at the moments you used to flinch at. The reflex is being replaced. The third 30 days install the behavior. You begin to act like the inheritor in the small daily decisions where the old self-image used to reassert itself. You quote yourself at the number the work is worth. You hold the price. You let the deposit sit in the account without immediately distributing it. You walk into the hotel restaurant and order what you actually wanted to order. The body, by this point, has accepted the new frequency as native. 3 months from the day you start, the protocol will not feel like a practice. It will feel like the way you live now. 1 additional ritual. Once a week, in the morning, in front of the largest mirror in your home, you will stand for 15 minutes and look into your own pupils. You will not look at your face. You will not assess your skin or your hair or the weight that arrived in your 50s. You will look directly into the black of the pupil, past the iris, into the point where the light enters the eye and is not reflected back. You will place one hand flat on your chest, over the sternum, with light pressure, and you will say, out loud, the 3 sentences from the declaration, once, with the same level voice, looking the inheritor in the eye. The first time you do this, you will laugh, or look away, or cry, or feel ridiculous. That is the old self-image protesting. Continue. By the 3rd time, the protest will have quieted. By the 8th, the figure in the mirror and the figure speaking will have become the same figure. By the 12th, you will not need the mirror anymore. You will carry the recognition inside the body. where it was always supposed to live. Return now to the room where this video started. You are in your bedroom. It is dark. The vision board is still on the wall. The magazine cutouts of the cars, the mansion, the stacks of bills, the apartment number written in marker across the A4 sheet, all still where you taped them, in the original order, in the original arrangement. You walk over to the wall. You put your hand on the paper. You feel the same temperature you felt at the beginning of this video. The same dry resistance of cheap printer stock. The same weight, which is no weight at all. Then, without ceremony, you take the paper down. You take down all of it. Every image, every cutout, every number you wrote in marker on the hope that the universe would read it. You fold the papers in half and then in quarters, and you drop them into the small wastebasket beside the desk. You are not throwing away your desire. You are throwing away the posture of asking. You sit down on the edge of the bed. You put one hand flat on your sternum. You feel the heart beating underneath the palm. You feel the breath moving the rib cage. You feel the warm pressure of your own hand against your own body, and you notice, possibly for the first time in your adult life, that everything required to begin is already inside the circle the palm is closing. The room is the same room. The walls are the same walls. The dark is the same dark. The figure in the room is no longer asking.